What is the true price of pride? For David Sterling, a self-made tech billionaire, it was a lesson he was about to learn in the most brutal way imaginable. He had everything skyscrapers bearing his name, a fleet of luxury cars, and a beautiful wife, Sophia, who was carrying his first child. But when Sophia, plagued by a strange pregnancy craving, made one simple, humble request, David responded not with love, but with cruel mockery. He dismissed her needs wrapped in his own arrogance. The next morning, the silence in their penthouse apartment was deafening. He found her unconscious, a single folded note on the pillow beside her. What was written on that note would not only expose a secret, but shatter his entire world. The Sterling penthouse was less a home and more a monument to David's success. It occupied the top 2 floors of the Sterling Tower, a gleaming spire of glass and steel that pierced the Chicago skyline. The views were breathtaking, stretching from the dense urban grid to the vast, placid expanse of Lake Michigan. Yet inside the atmosphere was as sterile as an art gallery after hours. Polished marble floors reflected minimalist furniture arranged with geometric precision. The air itself seemed filtered of any spontaneity, any warmth. This was the gilded cage where Sophia Sterling spent her days. At 7 months pregnant, her world had shrunk to these 1,000-square-foot rooms. Before David, her life had been vibrant, filled with the loud, chaotic love of her family, the smell of her sister Clara's over-baked cookies, and the satisfaction of her work as a pediatric nurse. She had been Sophia Hayes, then a woman whose wealth was measured in laughter and connection. Now she was Mrs. Sterling, a title that felt more like a job description. David was a force of nature, a whirlwind of ambition and intellect that had swept her off her feet. He was charming, decisive, and saw the world as a series of problems to be solved, a market to be conquered. He loved her, she believed, but his love was possessive, a collector's pride. She was his most beautiful acquisition. The pregnancy had changed things, not for the better. David saw it as the next logical step in building his dynasty, the securing of an heir. For Sophia, it was a deep, primal transformation, one that left her feeling vulnerable and increasingly isolated. Her morning sickness had been severe, and now in her 3rd trimester, strange, powerful cravings had taken hold. Tonight, it was an overwhelming, almost painful urge. It wasn't for Belgian chocolates or rare imported fruits, things David could have summoned with a single phone call. It was for something specific, something from her past. "David," she called out softly. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, a tablet in his hand glowing with stock tickers. He didn't turn. "1 second, Soph. Tokyo is about to close." Sophia rested a hand on her swollen belly, where their son was restlessly kicking. "It's the baby," she said, her voice a little stronger. "He's hungry." This got his attention. He turned a perfect, practiced smile on his face. "Of course. What does the little prince require? I'll have the chef whip up anything you want. Wagyu sliders, lobster bisque." She shook her head, a hesitant smile on her lips. "No, nothing like that. It's silly." "Nothing silly when it comes to my son," he said, walking over and placing a proprietary hand on her stomach. "Tell me." She took a deep breath. "I want a sunrise omelette from a little place near my old apartment. The Nook." David's smile froze, then slowly melted into a look of faint disgust. The Nook. That greasy spoon off Fullerton. You can't be serious. The warmth drained from Sophia's face. "I am. I can almost taste it. The crispy bacon, the sharp cheddar, and the way Mr. Henderson always folded it so perfectly. Henderson, David scoffed, dropping his hand and stepping back. Sophia, you are carrying the next Sterling. Your body is a temple, not a cheap diner. Do you have any idea what kind of low-grade oil and processed cheese they use in a place like that? Think of the baby's development. His neural pathways are forming. They don't need to be clogged with peasant food. The word hung in the air between them, sharp and cruel. Peasant food. He had said it. He had looked at a cherished memory, a simple comfort she desperately craved, and branded it as unworthy. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. It's not peasant food, David. It's just home. It's a memory. Memories are fine, but we're making new ones now. Better ones, he said dismissively, turning back to his tablet. I'll have Chef Antoine make you a proper frittata. Organic eggs, Gruyere, prosciutto di Parma. It's healthier, better. He didn't see the single tear that escaped and traced a path down her cheek. He didn't hear the soft, defeated sigh that left her lips. He had solved the problem. He had upgraded her craving to something that fit his standards. Fine, David, she whispered to his back. A frittata. She ate the dish alone in their vast dining room, under a crystal chandelier that cost more than her parents' house. The frittata was technically perfect. The eggs were fluffy, the Gruyere was nutty, the prosciutto was salty and delicate, but it tasted like ashes in her mouth. Every bite was a reminder of his derision. Every swallow felt like a betrayal of herself. Later that night, as she lay in their king-sized bed, the space between them felt as wet and cold as the lake outside. David was already asleep, his breathing even and untroubled. He had already forgotten the conversation. For him, it was a minor issue, swiftly resolved. For Sophia, it was a crack in the foundation of their life together. She felt a profound loneliness, a deep, aching sadness that the craving had only intensified. The baby kicked again, a strong, insistent thump against her ribs. It felt less like a playful nudge and more like a desperate plea. She placed her hand over the spot, her own tears now falling freely onto the 1,000 thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets. I'm sorry, she whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was talking to her unborn son or to the woman she used to be. I'm so sorry. The craving hadn't subsided. It was a physical ache now, a hollow yearning in the pit of her stomach that no gourmet frittata could ever fill. It was a hunger for more than just food. It was a hunger for understanding, for acceptance, for love that didn't come with conditions and a price tag. David Sterling woke to the programmed gentle chime of his smart home system. 5:30 a.m., as always. The blackout curtains slid open silently, revealing a pre-dawn Chicago still cloaked in hues of indigo and grey. His routine was his religion. A cold shower to jolt his system, a review of the Asian and European market reports, while his espresso machine brewed the perfect shot, and a 30-minute high-intensity workout in his private gym. He felt a fleeting, gnawing sense of guilt about the previous night. Sophia had been quiet after the omelette incident. Too quiet. He made a mental note to smooth things over. He'd buy her something. A necklace, maybe. The new Cartier collection had just dropped. That always worked. He compartmentalized the guilt and pushed it away, focusing on the numbers flashing across his screen. Sterling Industries was up 1.2% in pre-market trading, a good start to the day. After his workout, showered and dressed in a bespoke suit, he glanced at the bed. Sophia was still asleep, a lump under the silk duvet. She was probably exhausted. Pregnancy, he mused, was an inefficient biological process. He decided to let her rest. He'd have his breakfast meeting at the office. He was halfway out the door of the penthouse when a strange feeling stopped him, an unnatural stillness. Usually he could hear the faint hum of the air purifiers or the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. But this was a different kind of silence. It was heavy, absolute. He frowned, turning back. "Sophia!" he called out. No answer. He walked back towards the bedroom, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. A prickle of unease ran up his spine. He pushed the bedroom door fully open. The room was bathed in the cool morning light. Sophia was exactly as he'd left her, a still form in the center of the vast bed. But something was wrong. Her position was too rigid, her face turned towards the window, unnaturally pale against the dark grey pillows. "Soph," he said, his voice sharper now. He strode to the bedside. "Sophia, wake up. I'm heading out." He reached out to touch her shoulder and recoiled. Her skin was clammy and cold. A jolt of pure, icy fear shot through him, a sensation so foreign he barely recognized it. He grabbed her shoulder more firmly, shaking her. "Sophia." Her head lolled to the side with a terrifying lack of resistance. Her eyes were closed, her lips tinged with a faint bluish hue. Panic, raw and primal, clawed its way up his throat. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers suddenly clumsy and useless. 911. He barked their address, his voice cracking. As he ended the call, his frantic eyes scanned the scene, trying to make sense of the impossible. And then he saw it. On the pillow next to her head, placed with deliberate care, was a single folded piece of cream-colored stationery. Sophia's personal stationery, embossed with a simple S. It wasn't crumpled or hastily written. It was neat, precise. With a trembling hand, David reached for it. He felt as though he were disarming a bomb. The paper was cool to the touch. He unfolded it. The handwriting was Sophia's, her familiar, elegant script, yet it seemed strained, shaky. The note was short, just 2 lines that would detonate his entire existence. "The price of pride is paid influence. The cravings were never for me." David read the words once, twice, a third time. They made no sense, yet they felt like a verdict. The price of pride. His own word pride, thrown back at him like a dagger, paid in silence, the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. The cravings were never for me. What could that possibly mean? He looked from the note to Sophia's pale, still face. Her hand was resting on her stomach. Her fingers, usually so full of life, were curled slightly as if protecting the precious life within. The life he had so arrogantly claimed to be protecting with his prosciutto and Gruyere. His mind replayed their conversation from last night, his own voice dripping with condescension. Clogged with peasant food, the hurt in her eyes, the way she had shrunk away from him. He had thought it was a minor disagreement, a trivial matter of taste. But this note, this terrifying scene screamed that it was something more. Something vital. The wail of sirens grew louder, pulling him from his horrified trance. He looked at his unconscious wife, the cryptic note clutched in his hand, and the empire he had built with such ruthless efficiency felt like it was turning to dust around him. The numbers on his stock ticker meant nothing. The view of his city meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was the woman in the bed and the terrifying, unshakable feeling that he, David Sterling, the man who solved every problem, had just broken something utterly irreplaceable, and he had no idea why. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was a controlled chaos David had only ever seen in movies. The harsh fluorescent lights, seemed to strip away his tailored suit's authority, rendering him just another terrified family member. He was shunted aside by a swarm of doctors and nurses who descended on Sophia's gurney shouting medical terms he didn't understand. BP is 180/110. Tox screen stat. Possible seizure activity. Get me an OB/GYN consult now. He stood uselessly in a corner, the folded note a burning ember in his pocket. He had tried to give it to a paramedic, who had glanced at it, handed it back and said, "Sir, we need to focus on stabilizing your wife. You can talk to the doctor later." An hour bled into 2. He paced the small, drab waiting room, ignoring the calls lighting up his phone. His COO, his legal team, his mother. He swiped them all away. The Sterling Empire could burn for all he cared. Finally, a woman in blue scrubs with tired, intelligent eyes and a name tag that read Dr. Ramirez approached him. "Mr. Sterling." David's head snapped up. "My wife, the baby. Are they okay?" Dr. Ramirez's expression was unreadable, a professional mask of calm. "Your wife is stable for now. We've moved her to the obstetrics ICU. She experienced what we believe to be an eclamptic seizure, a severe complication of preeclampsia. Her blood pressure is dangerously high, and it's affecting her kidney and liver function." Preeclampsia her doctor never mentioned. "It can develop rapidly in the 3rd trimester, Mr. Sterling. The key is managing the symptoms." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "We also found severe electrolyte and nutrient deficiencies, specifically magnesium and a particular amino acid composite. It's quite a rare presentation. It's almost as if her body has been crying out for something it desperately needs and isn't getting." The doctor's words hit him like a physical blow. Crying out for something it desperately needs. He thought of the sunrise omelette. He thought of his cruel dismissal. Before he could process this, the waiting room doors burst open, and a whirlwind of fury entered. It was Clara Hayes, Sophia's older sister. Her eyes, the same warm brown as Sophia's, were blazing with a fire that seemed to scorch him from across the room. "You," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at him. "This is your fault. Clara, please. Don't you, Clara, please me, you monster." She cried, her voice attracting the attention of the few other people in the room. "I spoke to her last night. She called me sobbing after you humiliated her. All she wanted was a stupid omelette, David. A taste of home because she felt so completely alone in that sterile museum you call a house." Every word was a nail in his coffin. "I didn't understand. Of course you didn't understand," Clara shot back, her voice breaking with a sob. "When have you ever understood anything that doesn't have a price tag attached? She told me how you've been for months. Dismissive, cold, obsessed with this perfect pregnancy. You weren't nurturing a wife. You were curating an incubator for your precious heir." A nurse tried to intervene. "Ma'am, please, this is a hospital." Clara ignored her, her focus entirely on David. She was scared. "She told me she felt off for weeks, but she was afraid to tell you because you'd just say it was an inconvenience to your schedule. She craved that food because it was the only comfort she could think of, and you took that away from her too." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "She said you called it peasant food." David flinched as if he'd been slapped. He had no defense. It was the truth. He finally found his voice a ragged plea. "Is she awake? Can I see her?" "Why?" "So you can lecture her on the nutritional benefits of kale while she's hooked up to a ventilator." Clara laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "They won't let anyone but family see her." "I am her family. I'm her husband. he roared, the sound echoing his desperation. Clara's face hardened into a mask of pure contempt. A husband is a partner, a protector, someone who listens. You, David, were just the architect of her cage. You don't deserve to be in the same room as her. She turned on her heel and walked towards the ICU doors, leaving David standing alone in the center of the waiting room. Her accusations hung in the air, witnessed by strangers. For the first time in his adult life, David Sterling was utterly powerless. His money couldn't fix this. His influence couldn't rewind time. He had built an empire on the foundation of his own pride, and now its price was being tallied in the silent beeps of hospital machines and the righteous fury of the sister who had loved Sophia all along. He sank into a hard plastic chair, pulling the note from his pocket again. The cravings were never for me. It wasn't about Sophia's feelings or memories. It was about the baby she was trying to protect, the baby he had almost killed with his arrogance. The reckoning had begun. The hours that followed were a blur of sterile corridors and the rhythmic, unnerving beep of monitors. Clara had been granted access to Sophia's room, a silent guardian at her sister's side. David was relegated to the hallway, a ghost haunting the periphery of the crisis he had created. He could see glimpses through the window in the door, Sophia looking small and fragile in the hospital bed, surrounded by a web of tubes and wires. Finally, Dr. Ramirez emerged, her face etched with a clinical gravity that offered no comfort. She beckoned him to a small consultation room nearby. "Mr. Sterling," she began, sitting down opposite him. "I need you to listen very carefully. Your wife's condition is complex. We've run a full metabolic panel, and the results are unusual." David leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "Just tell me what's wrong. As I mentioned, she has severe preeclampsia, but what we believe triggered the eclamptic seizure is an underlying and extremely rare metabolic condition. We're calling it, for lack of a better term, gestational nutrient binding deficiency. In English, doctor. Please." Dr. Ramirez took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Essentially, the pregnancy has triggered a condition where Sophia's body has trouble absorbing certain micronutrients from food, specifically a combination of magnesium and a sulfur-rich amino acid called taurine. In a non-pregnant person, it might manifest as mild fatigue. In a pregnant woman, it's catastrophic. These nutrients are vital for regulating blood pressure and neural function, both for the mother and the developing fetus." She slid a tablet across the table, showing a series of complex charts. "Her body wasn't just craving food, Mr. Sterling. Her brain, on a primal, instinctual level, was screaming for the specific chemical compounds it needed to keep herself and her baby alive. It was a biological SOS. The blood drained from David's face. "And what kind of food would have... these things?" Dr. Ramirez looked him straight in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "High concentrations of taurine and easily absorbable magnesium are often found in specific combinations: dark meat poultry, certain shellfish eggs, and particularly they are found in organ meats like liver and in high-quality cured pork like bacon. When combined with eggs and cheese, which aid in absorption, well, it creates a sort of perfect nutritional cocktail for someone with her specific deficiency." David felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Bacon, eggs, cheese. The sunrise omelette. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a whim. It was medicine. "The omelette," he whispered the words, tasting like poison. "She wanted an omelette from a diner, Doctor." Ramirez nodded slowly, her expression softening with a hint of pity. "It's entirely possible that her body, having eaten this dish in the past, catalogued it as a source of these vital nutrients. The craving wasn't psychological. It was physiological. A life-or-death imperative. The weight of his own words crashed down on him. Peasant food, low-grade oil, processed cheese. He hadn't just mocked her taste. He had denied her a life-saving treatment. He had lectured her on the superiority of a prosciutto frittata, while her body was failing, while her baby was being starved of what it needed to survive. "And the note," David said, his voice hoarse. She wrote, "The cravings were never for me." She was right, Dr. Ramirez confirmed gently. While her body was the one in crisis, the demand for these specific nutrients is exponentially higher because of the fetus. The baby's developing brain and nervous system were drawing every last particle of these compounds from her system, leaving her depleted and vulnerable. The craving was for him. She was trying to save her son. David Sterling, the titan of industry, the man who could bend markets to his will, finally broke. He buried his face in his hands, and a dry, racking sob escaped his chest. It was a sound of absolute self-loathing. He had wrapped his pride around himself like armor, and in doing so had become blind to the desperate battle his wife was fighting from within. "What can we do?" he asked, looking up, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Now! What can we do to fix this? We're administering magnesium sulfate intravenously to prevent more seizures and trying to stabilize her blood pressure," Dr. Ramirez explained. "We're also formulating a TPN, a total parenteral nutrition solution, to bypass her digestive system and get these nutrients directly into her bloodstream. But she's not out of the woods. The damage to her organs is significant, and we're monitoring the baby's distress levels closely." She stood up, her duty as a messenger fulfilled. "Mr. Sterling, for what it's worth, people don't know about these kinds of rare conditions. You couldn't have known." "But I could have listened," David choked out. "I could have just listened." He left the consultation room a changed man. The guilt was no longer a vague discomfort, but a living entity coiling in his gut. He knew what he had to do. It was irrational, it was pointless now, but he had to see it. He had to go to the place that held the cure he had so casually denied her. He needed to go to the Nook. David drove himself. He brushed past his frantic driver, took the keys to a low-profile sedan from his garage, and navigated the Chicago streets with a recklessness that mirrored the chaos in his soul. He left the gleaming steel and glass of downtown behind, crossing the river into the older brick-and-mortar neighborhoods of Lincoln Park. He found the address on Fullerton Avenue that Sophia had mentioned. He was expecting to see a humble, perhaps slightly grimy storefront, a beacon of greasy comfort. Instead, he found a construction site. The building that housed the Nook was gutted. The front windows were boarded over with raw plywood, a large, "Closed for renovation" sign plastered across them. A dumpster overflowed with debris, shattered plates, torn vinyl from old booths, a faded menu board with ghosts of chalk-written specials. David got out of the car and stared at the wreckage. This was impossible. Clara had said Sophia spoke to her last night after he had mocked her. She wouldn't have craved a place that was boarded up. He saw a man in his late 60s walking a small dog, who paused to look at the construction. On a hunch, David approached him. "Excuse me," David said. "I'm looking for the Nook Diner. I thought it was here." The man sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, this was it. Shame what happened. Best hash browns in the city." "What did happen?" David pressed, a new cold dread creeping in. "When did it close?" "About 2-3 weeks ago now." The man replied, his dog sniffing at the base of the dumpster. "Real sudden. Old Mr. Henderson, he'd run this place for 40 years. Said he'd never sell. Then poof. Some big real estate company, Aegis Holdings, or something, made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Rumor is they strong-armed him. Bought up the debt on his building, threatened foreclosure. He was heartbroken. Had to clear out in a week." 3 weeks ago. The timeline made no sense. Why would Sophia crave something from a place that had been closed for weeks? Had she not known, it seemed unlikely for a place that held such sentimental value. David's mind, trained to see patterns and solve complex problems, began to churn. This was no longer just a story of his own arrogance. There was a piece missing. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He wasn't looking at stock prices now. He was digging. "Aegis Holdings," he muttered, activating his corporate intelligence software, a proprietary system that could peel back the layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. Within minutes, the system began to spit out data. Aegis Holdings was a recently formed LLC with a single purpose: acquiring small, distressed commercial properties in key gentrification zones. Standard aggressive real estate tactics. But David dug deeper, tracing the source of Aegis's funding. The money trail was expertly hidden, routed through 3 different offshore banks. But David's system was built to crack precisely these kinds of firewalls. After a tense 10 minutes, the final link was established. The ultimate source of the capital for Aegis Holdings, the shadowy figure behind the curtain. The name on the screen made David's blood run cold. Victor Thorne. The name was a ghost from his past, a spectre of his own ruthless ambition. Victor Thorne had been his original partner, the brilliant programmer who had co-written the source code for the software that launched Sterling Industries. But in the final stages of securing their first round of funding, David had seen a path to absolute control. He had manufactured a crisis, accused Victor of trying to steal the IP, and used a vicious legal clause in their partnership agreement to push him out, leaving him with nothing but a mountain of legal debt and a shattered reputation. David had told himself it was just business. Victor had vanished after that, presumed broken. But clearly, he hadn't been. He had been waiting, biding his time. But why the Nook? It was a meaningless little diner. It made no sense. Unless it wasn't meaningless. A horrible, sickening thought began to form in David's mind. He called his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Ben. "Ben, I need you to do something for me. Off the books. Top priority." David said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to find out everything you can about a man named Henderson. He used to own a diner called The Nook on Fullerton. I want to know where he is now. And Ben, I also need you to run a check. See if there have been any unauthorized breaches of my wife's medical records. Any of them. Her OB, GYN, her GP, anything. Consider it done, Mr. Sterling." David hung up his heart, pounding. This was no longer a personal failing. This was a calculated attack. Victor hadn't just bought a random diner. He had targeted it. He had targeted Sophia. How would he know? How could he possibly know about her connection to the diner, or worse, about her medical condition, unless he had someone on the inside? Or he had hacked her records. He looked at the boarded-up windows of the Nook, and he didn't see a failed business. He saw the opening salvo in a war he never knew was being waged. A war where his enemy had known exactly where to strike, targeting, not his company, but the one vulnerability he had foolishly overlooked: his family. The craving wasn't a coincidence. It was a weapon, and Victor Thorne had just aimed it at the heart of his world. Armed with a name and a motive, David moved with the cold precision he normally reserved for a hostile takeover. Ben, his head of security, was ruthlessly efficient. Within 2 hours, he had 2 critical pieces of information. First, Mr. Henderson, the former owner of the Nook, had been relocated to a comfortable but isolated retirement community in Arizona a week ago. The buyout package had included a strict non-disclosure agreement. He was unreachable. Second, and far more chillingly, Ben confirmed a low-level data breach on the server of Sophia's obstetrics clinic 6 weeks prior. It was sophisticated, designed to look like random server noise, and had gone undetected. The hacker had accessed one file, Sophia Sterling's. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Victor knew. He knew about Sophia's rare condition before anyone else did. He knew about her past, her connection to the Nook information, easily obtainable through a deep-dive background check. He hadn't just stumbled upon an opportunity, he had engineered a catastrophe. David found Victor Thorne in his new kingdom. A sleek minimalist office on the 50th floor of a rival skyscraper, a deliberate echo of David's own penthouse. Victor had aged. The youthful optimism was gone, replaced by a predator's calm. He sat behind a large empty desk, looking out at the city. "David," Victor said, without turning around, as if he'd been expecting him. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to gloat some more. It's been a while." "The Nook, Victor," David said, his voice tight with restrained fury. "Aegis Holdings, my wife's medical records." Victor finally turned, a slow reptilian smile spreading across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Ah, you figured it out. I always did admire your mind, David. Your lack of a soul, not so much." "What did you do?" David demanded, taking a step forward. "Do?" Victor chuckled, steepling his fingers. "I did very little. That's the beauty of it. It was an exercise in pure strategy, a game of leveraging weaknesses. You taught me that." He stood up and walked to the window, gesturing at the Sterling Tower, which was visible from his office. "You see, for years I thought about how to destroy you, bankrupt your company, a hostile takeover too crude, too boring. I wanted to take what you valued most. But what do you value, David? Your money, your name? No. Those are just tools. You value control, your perfect controlled world." His eyes shifted, locking onto David's. "So I decided to introduce a little chaos. I started watching you, and I saw her. Sophia, your beautiful, gentle wife, your one true vulnerability. I had you investigated, of course, found out all about her charmingly humble past, her favorite little diner. And then I got lucky. A friend of a friend works in data security for the healthcare sector. For a price, he found me a little crack in the system. And I saw it. This fascinatingly rare condition. A ticking time bomb." David felt sick. "You weaponized her pregnancy." "I didn't have to," Victor said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The beauty of the plan is that I never laid a hand on her. I just removed a solution. I knew the craving would come. Her own biology guaranteed it. It was her body's last-ditch effort. All I had to do was buy a sad little diner and make sure the cure was unavailable. I just took away her hope. He walked closer, circling David like a shark. And then I left the rest to you. I counted on your arrogance, David. I counted on your pride. I knew you would never stoop to getting her food from a greasy spoon. I knew you would dismiss her, mock her, and replace her needs with your own superior version. I didn't poison her. You did, with every dismissive word, with every ounce of your condescension. The truth of it was a physical agony. Victor had set the trap, but David had been the one to spring it. He had been the instrument of his own family's destruction. "She's in the hospital," David choked out. "She could die. The baby." A tragic but predictable outcome. Victor said, his face devoid of any emotion. "You destroyed my life's work. You took my future. I thought it was only fair to return the favor. An heir for an heir, you might say. You built an empire on my back, David. I'm just showing you the price of the real estate." Rage, pure and blinding, surged through David. He lunged, grabbing Victor by his expensive lapels and slamming him against the glass window. The city skyline spun crazily behind Victor's head. "You will fix this," David snarled, his face inches from Victor's. Victor just laughed, a genuine, chilling laugh. "Fix it how you can't sue me for buying a property. You can't prove I accessed those records. It's my word against a ghost on the internet. You are left with nothing. Nothing but the knowledge that you failed her in every way a man can fail a woman." He reached up and calmly patted David's hand. "It's over, David. You've already lost." David let him go, stumbling back. Victor was right. The scheme was diabolically perfect. There was no evidence that would stand up in court, no clear line of causation. It was a campaign of psychological terror, and it had succeeded completely. He had walked in, seeking a confrontation, a confession. He left with something far worse, the absolute certainty that the monster responsible for this was not just Victor Thorne, but the man he saw in the mirror every single morning. David returned to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, not as a titan of industry, but as a ghost haunting the site of his own cataclysm. The bespoke suit he'd worn for his confrontation with Victor was now a wrinkled testament to his unraveling. His tie was gone, his collar unbuttoned, and a dark stubble was beginning to obscure the sharp jawline that so often graced the covers of business magazines. The fury had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold, heavy ash of consequence. Victor's plot didn't absolve him. It was a mirror that showed him the monster he had become, a monster Victor had known better than he knew himself. He found Clara standing guard outside Sophia's ICU room, her posture rigid with exhaustion and anger. When she saw him, her eyes narrowed. She looked ready for another fight. But David had no fight left in him. He stopped a few feet away, not daring to encroach on the space she was so fiercely protecting. "You were right." He began, his voice a hoarse rasp. The words felt flimsy, inadequate. "You were right about everything. I didn't see her. I only saw a reflection of myself, of my ambitions. You saw the man I refused to see in myself, the cold, arrogant fool who measured love in stock prices and organic ingredients." He finally met her gaze, and she saw the utter defeat in his eyes. He didn't just hurt her, Clara. He used me to do it. And I let him. Willingly. Clara stared at him, the armor of her anger cracking slightly at the sight of his complete surrender. She had wanted to see him broken, but the reality was more pathetic than satisfying. She saw the truth of his words. He was a man who had conquered the world only to lose his own soul. Without another word, she turned her back on him and faced the door to Sophia's room. Her silence a judgment more profound than any shout. For the next 2 days and nights, David made that sterile hospital corridor his purgatory. He refused to leave. The hard plastic chair became his office, his bedroom, his confessional. He didn't eat. He barely slept, jolted awake by nightmares of Sophia's pale face or the sound of Victor's triumphant laughter. He was a man of perpetual motion, of decisive action, and the forced stillness was a unique form of torture. In the endless quiet hours, his mind replayed his life with Sophia, not as a highlight reel, but as a catalogue of his failures. He remembered their first date, how he had been more focused on impressing her with the restaurant's Michelin stars than listening to her stories about her pediatric patients. He remembered their wedding day, the pride he felt showing her off a beautiful asset to complement his empire. He remembered countless nights when she would try to talk to him about her day, and he would dismiss it with a nod, his eyes glued to a tablet, his mind a million miles away in Tokyo or London. Each memory was a fresh stab of guilt, a testament to an emotional negligence that was in its own way as violent as Victor's scheme. This new horrifying clarity fueled a cold, detached rage. He sat in that hallway and systematically dismantled Victor Thorne's life. With his phone and a series of encrypted calls to his most trusted inner circle, he became the predator Victor had once accused him of being. He didn't use his name. He became a ghost in the system. An anonymous tip to the SEC flagged the irregular funding of Aegis Holdings. A carefully worded email to a journalist at the Wall Street Journal hinted at a story of corporate sabotage and stolen IP from years ago. He called in favors from bankers in 3 countries, ensuring that every line of credit Victor had built his new life on was simultaneously frozen and called in. He wasn't aiming for a dramatic courtroom battle. He was orchestrating a slow, silent financial strangulation. Victor wouldn't go to jail. He would be erased. He would drown in debt and litigation, his name becoming a footnote in a forgotten business textbook. The process brought David no joy, only the grim satisfaction of cauterizing a wound. On the morning of the 3rd day, Dr. Ramirez found him staring blankly at the wall, a ghost in an expensive suit. "She's awake," the doctor said softly. The words pierced through the fog of David's despair like a flare in the night. He shot to his feet, his heart lurching with a hope so fierce it was painful. "The baby," he choked out. "We delivered him via emergency C-section an hour ago." Dr. Ramirez said, a weary but genuine smile gracing her lips. "He's small, and he's in the NICU, but he's breathing on his own. His heart rate is stable. He's a fighter, Mr. Sterling, just like his mother." Relief washed over David so potent it nearly buckled his knees. He braced himself against the wall. Can I see her? Her sister is with her now. She has agreed to let you have a few minutes. She's asked to see you." The walk from the corridor to Sophia's new room in the maternity wing was the longest of David's life. Every step was heavy with the weight of his guilt and the terrifying uncertainty of what he would find. He was walking toward his judgment. He pushed the door open. The room was brighter, the web of tubes and wires mostly gone. Sophia was propped up on pillows, looking impossibly pale and fragile, but her eyes were open. They were clear, and they were fixed on him. Clara stood by the window, her arms crossed, a silent, unmoving sentinel. "David," Sophia whispered. Her voice was thin, but it cut through him like a razor. He moved toward the bed, a magnetic pull he was powerless to resist. He wanted to fall to his knees to grab her hand, but he felt he had forfeited all rights to touch her. He stood there exposed and broken. "Sophia, All the speeches he had rehearsed in the hallway, all the explanations and apologies, evaporated into dust. "Clara told me you've been out there," she said, her voice raspy, "that you haven't left." "Where else would I be?" he asked, his own voice cracking. This room, this woman, this was the center of his universe. He had just been too blind to see it. He had to tell her. She deserved the entire, ugly, unvarnished truth. Haltingly, his voice thick with shame, he recounted everything. He confessed his despicable pride, his cruel dismissal of her needs. Then he laid bare Victor's diabolical plot, not as an excuse, but as a final exhibit of his own character flaws. He didn't need a weapon, Sophia. He confessed, his gaze fixed on her hand lying on the blanket. He just needed me, my ego, my arrogant belief that anything I didn't approve of was inferior. He built the trap, but I walked us right into it. When he finished, a heavy silence descended on the room. Sophia turned her head to look out the window, a single tear escaping and tracing a slow path into her hairline. Finally, she spoke, her voice dangerously quiet. "So I wasn't even a person in this," she whispered, the words laced with a new, sharp bitterness. "To him, I was a tool to hurt you. To you, I was a silly, sentimental inconvenience. I was just a square on a chessboard for two arrogant men to fight over." The accusation struck him harder than any physical blow, because it was true. "Yes," he admitted the word, a poison on his tongue. "And it is the failure I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for." She was quiet for a long time, the only sound the faint rhythmic beep of her heart monitor. David braced himself for the verdict, for her to tell him to leave, to file for divorce, to never see her or their son again. He deserved nothing less. "When I was a little girl," she began, her voice gaining a sliver of strength, "and I had the flu, my mom would make me toast. Just plain buttered toast. But the way she made it, the way she cut off the crusts, it was the only thing that made me feel better. It wasn't the bread, David. It was the love. It was knowing I was cared for." She turned her head, and her eyes filled with a deep, weary sorrow locked onto his. "That omelette, it was my toast. I was in your glass tower, surrounded by things that cost a fortune, and I had never felt so poor in my life. I was scared. I felt alone and untethered. I just wanted something that felt like home. I needed to feel safe." The simple, devastating power of her words shattered the last vestiges of his composure. The dam of his carefully controlled emotions broke completely. He sank to his knees by her bedside, not as a gesture, but as a collapse. He buried his face in the thin hospital blanket that smelled of antiseptic and Sophia, and he wept. He wept for his blindness, for her loneliness, for the son he had almost lost, and for the man he should have been all along. It was a raw, guttural sound of a soul breaking open. After a long moment, he felt a light, hesitant touch on his head. Sophia's hand, weak but deliberate, was resting in his hair. "You built an empire, David," she whispered, her own voice thick with unshed tears. "An empire of glass and steel. But you let our home crumble into dust. An empire can be rebuilt. A home is much harder. It's built on small things, on listening, on toast." He looked up at her, his face a ruin of tears and shame. "Then let me try," he pleaded, his voice a raw whisper. Let me start over, from the foundation. No more glass and steel. Let me spend the rest of my life learning how to make you toast." A faint, watery smile touched her lips, the first he had seen in what felt like a lifetime. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was the first fragile glimmer of a sunrise after the longest, darkest night of their lives. She slowly, deliberately moved her hand from his hair and laid it on the bed between them, palm up. An invitation. With a trembling hand, he took it, his fingers lacing with hers. Her grip was weak, but it was there. It was a start. The journey ahead was a vast, uncharted wilderness of therapy, of rebuilding trust of him, learning to be a partner and a father, not a proprietor. It would be the hardest work of his life. But as he knelt there holding his wife's hand for the first time in a long time, David Sterling felt like he was finally home. The story of David and Sophia is a powerful and cautionary tale. It's a reminder that the most valuable things in life, love, trust, and empathy, can't be bought or measured on a stock ticker. David's wealth built a gilded cage, but his pride almost turned it into a tomb. It was only when he lost everything that he began to understand what truly mattered. Their journey forward would not be easy, but it started with a single vital lesson: listening. Listening not just to words, but to the needs of the heart. If this story moved you or made you think, please show your support by hitting that like button. It helps us bring more stories like this to you. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss our next real-life drama. We want to hear from you. What do you think is the biggest lesson from David's mistake? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.